So, since this is a dive watch, it has a few features that are usually unique to a dive watch. This one happens to have 1,000 feet or 300 meter water resistance, which they're not exactly the same, right? 1,000 feet is not exactly 300 meters, but hopefully at that point, right, if you are actually diving at that point, that small difference should not cause an issue. These numbers are actually minimums. So it's not that after 1,000 feet the watch will stop working or it will have a crystal that cracks or anything like that. They're designed for further depth. So the numbers on the dial are just the minimum. The other thing you'll oftentimes find on a diver, if it is an ISO certified diver, meaning they met a couple certain standards, one of those would be luminescent paint on a second hand so that you can see the watch is actually running, even in the dark. And then you'll have a one direction rotating bezel. It can only go one way, and locks going back the other way so that you have another way to time that cannot be extended. It can only be shortened. So if you're underwater and you bump the bezel, it will not cause you to stay down longer. You will actually come up earlier, which decreases your chance that you have issues with decompression, or if you're not checking your gauges, running out of air, but you should be checking your gauges. Also found on watches that are meant to go in or around water would be things like screw-down crowns. So on a screw-down crown, the tube is threaded, or sometimes you'll have an internal thread on the tube. This one has an external thread on the tube. And then we can pull the crown out to set the time. And this, when threaded back down, keeps the crown from having any freedom to move side to side. So that if you are underwater and you bump onto something, water cannot get in. It's not the threads that are keeping water out. It's the O-rings that are inside. And those O-rings actually seal the tube to the crown. The O-ring is actually inside of the case tube. And when the crown is put in the watch, it will seal to that case tube. Usually, there's more than one of these. In our case, we have 2 of them. And then there will usually be another flat gasket that is made of the same rubber that seals the face, the outside face of the tube. So here's that tube that is inserted into the case and sealed usually with some sort of Loctite so that it is watertight. And you'll have that flat gasket that's in the crown seals on that top surface as you screw the crown in. That also provides a little bit of resistance. As you compress on that flat gasket, it will push the threads the opposite direction so that it's less likely for the crown to unscrew itself because there's tension on those threads due to that compression of that gasket. Then there are two of these little O-rings that go inside the tube. So these two O-rings go inside this tube, and you won't be able to see them once they're in there, but they will seal the crown. And once this is screwed in, it will not be possible for the crown to move, which might potentially allow for air to burp out and water to enter the case. Here's a case without the bezel on it and without the tube. It also doesn't have a case back. When you bring your watch in for service, the watch will be disassembled to a point like this. And there are many small cracks and crevices all around the bezel side where water or sweat or colognes or perfumes could work their way into this area. Now this top edge here is as far as any kind of liquid should be able to get. But that means this whole surface here, that top corner, could potentially have salt water sitting on it. And if it's sitting there for too long, under the bezel, hidden away, it could actually cause pitting on that corner. And this surface here is where the Teflon gasket for the front crystal sits. So if any of that pitting becomes deep enough, you could see the possibility of not being able to reseal that crystal without a new case. Now on the back of a watch, in this particular case, you'll see an O-ring groove. So this groove here is where this O-ring sits. So this O-ring sits inside of that groove, and if it has a little bit of fomblin on there, which is a type of grease that we use in the watchmaking world, then it will stay put. But I'm able to put it in there for now, and when the case back goes on, it will seal on a flat surface of the case back. However, you'll notice that that leaves areas that are hidden, but water can still get there. This whole surface here is covered by the case back, but water could get there. And if salt water, chemicals, or anything that is potentially corrosive sits here for a long enough time, it could cause pitting. And again, deep enough pitting, working its way down into the O-ring groove, could potentially lead to a situation where this watch could not be made water resistant again. So that's one of the reasons it's good to service a watch if you want to try and keep it water resistant, or if you just want to keep the integrity of it as a collector's item or as a vintage watch. So the back crystal, if you look at a watch crystal, you should be able to see, usually it's white. You'll see a thin white line around the crystal. right by the edge of the metal that it's sealing with. That thin white line is a Teflon gasket. And that gasket, as we press fit the crystal into the case, it deforms and will seal against the stainless steel and seal against the edge of the crystal. And it holds strong enough so that even with a vacuum or going to higher elevations, right, and pressure decreases, it holds tight enough that even if the watchmaker introduces a vacuum to try and pull air from the case, the crystal won't pop out. And also if you go up in elevation, say in a small airplane that does not have a pressurized cabin, the crystal will not pop out when the pressure outside of the watch decreases.